Good to have you on the programme today. Lots to talk about. I just want to start with comments that Pete Hegseth, the US Secretary of War, made overnight. He said, capable partners are good partners, unlike so many of our traditional partners who wring their hands and clutch their pearls, humming and hawing about the use of force. Is he talking about us? Because it feels like he is.
I don't know. I mean, you'd have to ask him. But, the Prime Minister was very clear yesterday that he will take decisions in the interests of Britain and learning the lessons of things like Iraq and other things. We have very clear frameworks in which we make decisions about using force and about military intervention. And as the Prime Minister said to the House of Commons yesterday, we'd only do so if it was in our interest as a legal basis and as a clear plan. It's pretty clear, though, the Americans are frustrated. Would you agree with that? I mean, Donald Trump's said as much, right? Well, I've seen the President's words, but that doesn't really negate the fact that we make decisions, as I say, on the basis of legality and British interest. And, we were content to offer bases at Diego Garcia and RAF Fairford because evidently the operations the Americans will run from those airfields will reduce the risk to British citizens and British assets in the region, and that's why we agreed to the request to use those bases on that basis alone. But the Prime Minister was very clear that we were not involved in the first strike, and we're not kind of going to war with Iran or getting involved in a wider set of activities in the region. I'm interested in what you say here because it does echo Keir Starmer's words. He said yesterday the UK does not believe in regime change from the skies. I mean, Donald Trump said this is about regime change and it's happening from the skies. Does this mean that the UK government doesn't actually agree with the US and Israel action? Well, the Prime Minister's words are very clear. I don't need to repeat them. No, I'm genuinely not actually clear, though. Does this mean the UK government doesn't agree with the action, or do you agree with it? Well, we were not involved in the initial action. I know you weren't involved, but I'm asking if you agree with the action. Well, evidently we weren't involved, which meant that we were not going to get involved in the first instance. But as I say, so the request does that mean... I'm only asking again because I do think it's quite important. Does that mean that we didn't actually agree with the initial action? That's why we weren't involved. Is that what you're saying? So we weren't involved, and as the Prime Minister said, we would never be involved if we didn't think that there was a legal basis to do so or it was in British interest to do so. But the Prime Minister's words are clear in that these disagreements, as difficult as they may be, you have to try to resolve them the best you can through diplomatic channels and the negotiating table, and that's the British government's position. So was the action illegal then? Well, of course, I mean, the Americans have got to set out the legal basis for their interventions. But our assessment is that we didn't think there was a legal basis for it. So it would be illegal. We were not involved in the first wave because it didn't meet the test the Prime Minister's set out. Whereas what we have agreed to this week is legal because what we're doing is defensive action to protect British citizens in the region, of whom there are over 300,000 of them across the area. So I think the public would rightly expect us to do what we can to defend them. And on the basis of legality and British interests, that's why we've consented to the use of our air bases. And actually, before that request as well, we did have British jets in the air doing defensive action, essentially shooting missiles down from the sky to support our regional allies. And so defensive action where there is a legal basis is justified, and that's what we are doing as a country. What exactly has happened since we said that? Has anything taken off from bases? What has our involvement been? So we obviously don't comment on operational issues in terms of air bases in the media, as you'll understand. But in the first few hours, we did have RAF assets in the sky, as I say, shooting missiles down that had already been launched into regional ally spaces, protecting our military bases, as you might expect. The thing we've now agreed to, in addition to that, is that American air forces can use those bases, but only where they're taking off from those bases in order to defend British interests. You talked about defending British interests. There is an argument that the best way of defending British interests is keeping America on side. And the reason that I say this is because if you look at what's happened with Iran, it's a very good example of modern warfare, right? It's about missiles, it's about drones, and it's about stopping them, in the air, right? Our Defence Editor, Deborah Haynes, yesterday described our air defences as woeful. I mean, has the government invested enough, not just this government, but successive governments, in this modern type of war? And as a result, are we reliant on America to provide that kind of protection? On the first part of your question, the American relationship is important to us and continues to be important. Obviously, we've taken a slightly different approach in terms of the operation in the region at this stage, but that doesn't negate the importance of the relationship.
Well, they described you as clutching your pearls, and Donald Trump said he's frustrated. I mean...
Well, as I say, it's up to the Americans to narrate as they wish, but the ongoing relationship is functional and important. But also our European partners are also really important to us in this space. You've seen the Prime Minister here coordinate with the President of France and the Chancellor of Germany, coordinating with the European Commission on how we do work with our partners, not just in Europe, but in the region itself. And that's the right thing to do.
We've obviously got the spring forecast later today. There has been notes of an improving economic picture. I think it's important to say, borrowing costs, all that kind of thing. Are you worried that this could all change because of Iran? And I'm thinking particularly about inflation, oil prices, petrol prices.
Well, the Prime Minister and Chancellor have said repeatedly that international events can obviously affect the UK economy. We've seen that before and we will see it again. But that's why our plan in terms of stability and strength within the UK economy is so important, whether that's about stable public finances or bringing down national debt so we have more room for manoeuvre, keeping the cost of government borrowing down, tackling the cost of living for people, and on energy, making sure that we're investing in homegrown renewable energy.
Are you worried specifically about Iran and the cost of living?
Look, there's probably going to be some impact. There's no question about that. We don't know yet what that is. But I think in the spring forecast later, what the Chancellor will be able to show is that our plan is working in terms of a stable approach to the UK economy, that in a world where there is lots of things happening is at a very attractive economy for investors.
So an impact in terms of what petrol prices, is that the most likely one, you think?
So we have to see how long this goes on for. One of our hopes is that we can bring this to an end as quickly as possible. That's one of the reasons we've consented to our airbases being used, because the sooner it's over, the lesser the impact will be on our economy and the global economy.
The one other thing I wanted to ask you about was Ed Davey's comments about Dubai in the House of Commons yesterday. He said tax exiles should start paying taxes to fund the armed forces like the rest of us. The likes of Isabel Oakeshott and washed-up old footballers mock ordinary people who stay in the UK and pay our taxes here, but then expect us to pay the bill for their protection. Is he right? Well,
look, we expect British citizens, people who stay in this country, to pay their taxes here. That's why the government's changed lots of the old tax rules on the non-dom tax status, for example, that's been raising billions.
He's talking about people who live in Dubai, though, not who live here, right?
Sure, but if they live in another country, that's a decision for them. But if they want to live in this country, then they should pay their taxes. There's no question about that.
What he's talking about British citizens living in Dubai, tax exiles.
Well, any of us could leave and live in another country. All I'm saying is that if you're coming to the UK and you're going to live and work in the UK, then you should pay your taxes here.
What did you think of Ed Davey's comments then? Do you think it was appropriately timed?
Well, I think he's in tune with the public on this. I mean, if you live in the UK and expect the support of UK public services, you should pay your fair share of taxes towards them. I don't think there's any debate about that.
OK, and then just finally, I've got to squeeze it in, I'm very sorry. Poll today, the Greens have leapfrogged Labour. They're in second place after reform. I mean, are you worried? Are you the party of the left no longer?
No, I'm not. I'm not worried. I mean, you'll know polls move around all the time. The Greens, and I interact with the Greens a lot at my home in Bristol, they're essentially the populists of the left, whereas Reform are the populists of the right. And they have a lot of diagnoses of the problems. They don't really have any answers to how to fix them that are credible. And I think when the public look at that, especially at the point of a general election, they'll be able to see that neither the populist left or the populist right have got any credible plans, and they're not going to want either of them to become Prime Minister.
I mean, you're right, the polls move around all the time, but polls have pretty consistently shown that people are deeply unhappy with this Labour government, right? Do you need to change?
If you step back in time and look at polls for any government, it always ebbs and flows, especially when you are the people having to make difficult decisions.
It doesn't feel like it is ebbing and flowing, though. This is my point.
Get Ed Conway on your screen with his slides, and you should have a look at the ebbs and flows.
Don't worry, I'm very well across, the ebbs and flows of polling. I don't need Ed Conway to explain it to me.
I meant more for your viewers, but whether you or Ed do it is entirely up to you. But if you look at the graph, it is quite normal. Because governments have to make difficult decisions, right? Opposition parties don't have to. We had that for 14 years, but we'd rather be in government making those difficult decisions.
When was the last time Labour was leading the polls?
Well, when we won the general election, which is what
Yeah.
matters. Because at the end of the day, it's what matters at a general election when the public have to decide who they want to be leading this country. They gave us a very significant majority to do that not long ago. We're getting on with that plan for change. And by the time we get to the next general election, I'm very confident the public will see that we've been delivering on those promises.
OK, thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure.